Okay. So I'll anyway send a message to Mark, if he can come down on Monday so we can go back together. He said he'll try.
Yeah, Raghu, we can start.
Yes, Anshika.
Yes, sir. Okay. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Anshika Agrawal, and I'm a second year student of Business Management program at XLRI. So I would like to start the session with a famous saying by Christopher Gilbert. So there's no right way to do the wrong things. Ethical choices sometimes require sacrifice. This may not always lead to positive feelings for the decision maker, but it should always lead to positive feelings for those affected by the decision maker. So, despite the pandemic, we are gathered here today, albeit virtually for the 29th annual JRD Tata Ethics Oration. So, the focus this year is on the business ethics and stakeholder capitalism. And on behalf of the chairman of the Board of Governors of XLRI, Mr. T.V. Narendran, the Board of Governors of XLRI, the Director of XLRI, Father Paul Fernandez, and faculty, staff, and students of XLRI, I take immense pleasure in welcoming Dr. Edward Freeman, the speaker for the day. So, Dr. Freeman is an American philosopher and professor of business administration at Darden School of the University of Virginia. He's known for his immense contribution to the stakeholder theory, corporate strategy, and business ethics. He has multiple publications under his name and was awarded the Pioneer Award for Lifetime Achievement by the World Resource Institute and by the Aspen Institute. We look forward to an insightful session with him. So before we start the event, let us seek the grace of Almighty, which will be followed by a short video about the event. I request the IT team to play the prayer song in the video.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, and worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, and worship Your holy name.
Or is it a long, winding conversation? What is it? What is it that we leave behind? Memories? Memories that inspire. Your relentless pursuit for perfection with a deep human touch shines a guiding light for many.
When I realized the list of speakers for tonight included JRD Tata, I must say I start this oration with a sense of awe and humility. It's quite an honor, thank you. After considerable thought, I decided to speak on a topic that's really close to my heart, and one that I think is really important and crucial to the survival and rebirth of businesses across the globe. Putting ethics into action, not just the talk, but the walk and the implementation and the execution. In short, it's that perception of businesses putting profits first before people.
I can start with any of the points you raised, but the point that you raised about media becoming the story, it reminds me of a story. So from today onwards, please do not try and become the story yourself.
Thank you for the video. So I now invite Dr. Tata Raghuram, Chairman of Father Arup Center for Ecology and Sustainability, which we call FACES. So Dr. Raghuram has over 30 years of research, teaching and consulting experience in sustainable development. He probably is the first professor in India to offer a full course on corporate sustainability. So I request Dr. Raghuram to introduce us to the speaker for the event. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Anshika. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since capitalism gained favor with the policymakers globally. It is posited as an efficient vehicle for wealth creation with trickle-down benefits for all stakeholders. However, on the contrary, affording primacy for unbridled wealth creation has created social inequalities, unethical practices, environmental degradation, and widespread trust deficit amongst the stakeholders. Freeman, Martin, and Parmar, in a 2007 article, pointed out that traditional narratives of capitalism rely upon the assumptions of competition, limited resources, and a winner-take-all mentality as fundamental to business and economic activity. These approaches leave little room for ethical analysis, have a simplistic view of human beings, and focus on value capture rather than value creation. As the limitations of capitalism get exposed, we need an equally powerful alternative economic narrative that creates value while ensuring inter and intra-generational equity, stands up to the scrutiny through an ethical lens, and also ensures an inhabitable earth for all life forms forever. The idea of stakeholder capitalism, when adopted and implemented wholeheartedly and widely, could lead us to a better future while solving many of the global problems that we face today. I'm delighted that we have today with us Dr. Edward Freeman, an authoritative scholarly voice and an advocate for an alternative economic vision through stakeholder capitalism. Dr. Freeman is a university professor and also a professor of business administration and an academic director of the Institute for Business in Society at the University of Virginia Darden Business School. Dr. Freeman is perhaps best known for his award-winning book, Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach, published by Cambridge 2010, but originally published in 1984. His other books on stakeholder theory are Stakeholder Theory, The Art of the State of the Art, Cambridge 2010, and Managing for Stakeholders, Yale 2007. More recent books of Dr. Freeman include The Power of and Responsible Business Without Trade-offs, Columbia University 2020, Models of Leadership in Plateau and Beyond, Oxford University Press 2021. He is also an author and editor of over 100 volumes and 200 articles in the areas of stakeholder management, business strategy, and business ethics. I cordially invite Dr. Freeman to deliver the 29th JRD Tata Ethics Oration. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghuram and Father.
Team.
In the past. So thank you very much for inviting me. I wish I could be there in person, but in these days, this is what we have to deal with. It's very early where I am. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, at my son's house, visiting him. And so it's, if you will, excuse, please, any early morning mistakes I make. I would really appreciate that. I'll do my best here. I want to talk about stakeholder capitalism and the connection to business ethics. And we have this old story about business that I don't think it was ever very good, but I mean, maybe it was, maybe it played a role that was useful. But you know the old story. It says business is primarily about the money. It's about money and profits, and primarily profits for so-called owners or shareholders of public companies. And business is best understood as sort of free, unregulated markets, even though we may not know exactly what those are. And the view of human beings in this idea about business is that we are, for the most part, short-term, one-dimensional, self-interested maximizers of our own self-interest now and in the future. And I have to say, when I tell people I teach business ethics, you know, I can see some smiles out there already. They have to manage not to laugh, or they say things like, you know, business ethics, you know, that's an oxymoron. Two words, you put them together, they're a contradiction. My favorite contradiction, I think, is American football, because I'm an American, I've played, and I don't know the rules. And people try to tell me that cricket is complicated. Cricket is a very easy game compared to American football, for me, at least. Or, you know, I teach business ethics. Oh, I didn't know business had any. Or must be a short course. Or I was, before the pandemic, I was in a bar in Copenhagen and talking with some fellow, and he said, what do you do? I said, I teach business ethics. And he said, well, that's a theoretical subject, isn't it? You know, this idea that business and ethics don't go together is an idea that's deep in the culture, and it's in the culture all over the world. As I've been all over the world, this old story dominates the way we think about business. And yet I think it's actually not the way that business has ever really worked. And I don't know why this old story is what it is, but basically what I'm going to suggest is that we need to get rid of it. And furthermore, you know, I've actually got some good news. I think we are getting rid of this old story. A new story about business is emerging. And for all of you students out there, it's a story that you're going to take and build your companies. Whether you start your own or you work with others, it's going to be the new normal for the 21st century. The short form of it is becoming a more responsible, a more conscious, as some people would say it, business is really table stakes for a 21st century, successful businesses. And it's true all over the world. Ideas like purpose and stakeholders and ethics and values and dealing with societal problems like inequality, like global warming, etc., will be seen as something, this is what business has to do. And it'll be connected, seem to be connected to profitability. Well, why do I say this? There are many, many movements around the world. When you take that point of view, there's been a marked increase in people thinking about CSR, corporate social responsibility, or philanthropy, or sustainability. Now, these are pretty old ideas, but there's been an increase in people thinking about them, and the constituencies of business demanding that businesses think about those things. But we have lots of new ideas like social entrepreneurship, social reporting. There have been people who have argued for a group called conscious capitalism, which has been proposed by Raj Sisodia and John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. And I'm lucky enough to be on their board, so I get to hang out with some of them, radically thinking about business in a different way, and thinking about them as, yeah, of course profits are important, but so are other things as well. There's a group called inclusive capitalism that worries about poverty. There's Richard Branson's group. I can't ever remember the name of it, but they worry about sustainability and global warming. people thinking now about green business, companies who are using the sustainable development goals to actually measure their operations and how they're doing. And of course, we have things like at the UN, like the GRI. Even Wall Street and the city are getting in on the act here as they worry about impact investing. And the magical phrase these days is ESG, environment, society, and governance, as thinking about, well, you can't properly, they say, think about a company's risk if you don't have ESG data as well. People have proposed new capitalism, responsible capitalism, capitalism 2.0, connected capitalism, lots of other stakeholder capitalism. And this is a movement that's really growing around the world in lots of different ways. I know it's there in India. I recently had a chance to speak to some people in Thailand who told me there were over 5,000 social entrepreneurs there. It's literally all over the world now, but it's not one movement, it's many of them. In the waning days of the Obama administration, that would have been 2016, I was invited to a meeting at the White House, and this was run by the Secretary of Labor in the US, a man named Tom Perez. He wanted to know, because he thought in 2016, everybody thought they had 4 more years. They didn't realize what was about to happen. But he wanted to figure out what government could do to increase this trend, to really say, well, let's figure out how to do this faster and better. And he wanted to know what's the right brand. So he invited all the people that had been writing about this stuff and doing it. He invited them to the White House, and we sat around and tried to figure this out. And I was sitting there and I thought, I'm not sure this is the right question to ask. I'm not sure what's the brand and what government can do to sell the brand. I'm not sure those are the right questions, even though Tom's heart was clearly, in the right place with trying to reform this old story, as was everyone else's. We could all agree that the old story needed to go. We just couldn't think through what ought to be in the new story, because everyone had their own point of view. And so 2 colleagues of mine and I decided to write a book in which we would say, well, look, let's don't worry about the brand, whether it's stakeholder capitalism or conscious capitalism or inclusive capitalism. That doesn't really matter. What matters is, what are the 4 or 5 or however many really critical ideas that have to be in this new story of business? And we weren't so vain as to think about that we needed to completely throw out the old story. That there were some things that, look, profits are important. It's just they're not the only thing. And so we decided to write this book called The Power of And, Responsible Business Without Trade-offs. And what we argued was there are 5 kind of critical ideas that are important here. If we think about these 5 ideas, then regardless of what the brand turns out to be, or brands, what we'll have is a better way to think about business. So I want to talk about each of these 5 ideas briefly, and what the connection to business ethics is of them. And then hopefully we'll have lots of time for your questions and comments as well. So the first idea is to say, well, we need purpose and profits. Many of the people want to throw out, the other side. Yeah, we need purpose, but so don't focus on profits. And what we've said is, no, we got to have both of those things. Let me try to explain. The old story just gets purpose wrong. It says the purpose of business is to make as much money as you can for shareholders. We'll save the shareholder part for the next idea. But, it's like saying, I need red blood cells to live. I hope everybody's okay with that. That we're all on the same scientific page. In today's world, you never know, but I hope we're all okay with that. But it doesn't follow that the purpose of my life is to make red blood cells. That would be a silly idea. Businesses must have profits to live. And it doesn't matter what the form of the business is. Everybody's got to get paid, and we got to have enough money left over to invest in the future. So, profits are important, but it doesn't follow that profits are the purpose of a business. That doesn't make any sense at all, to me at least. And without going into a long harangue about economic theory here, I would say, even if sometimes we have to focus on profits because the world has changed or we've made a mistake, as humans do, it still doesn't follow that that's the purpose of a business. Just like, look, a few years ago, I had both of my hips replaced. That was not a fun thing to have happen over the weekend. I had to learn to walk again, etc. But, it happened. And I had to focus on making red blood cells because I had lost a lot of blood in the surgery. But it didn't follow that the purpose of my life was now to make red blood cells, even though I had to focus on that for a little bit, So this idea that the purpose of business is to make as much money as possible is, in my view, a kind of a silly idea. But it's one that's driven much of our business system for a long time. Even though I think if you actually look at what businesses do, rarely do they really focus on that. And look, entrepreneurs don't start businesses to make as much money as they can. They just don't. Entrepreneurs start a business because they're on fire about something. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, on fire about the computer industry. I've met entrepreneurs in my time I've spent in India on fire about everything from developing the country to a particular technology they had or a particular service they had. Entrepreneurs see the world differently. If I have students come to me and say, I'm going to start this business, I'm going to make a lot of money, I'm going to flip it, I'm going to make a lot of money. What I say to them is, you need to get a job because you got a much better chance of making money at a job than you do starting the business. So starting a business is hard. A friend of mine who's an entrepreneur in Copenhagen who started a restaurant called Nomo that was seen as like the best restaurant in the world for a long time, said, we didn't start Nomo to make as much money as we can because we didn't make any for the first 19 years. And that's a story that's told over and over and over again by entrepreneurs. Now, so purpose is a critical idea, but it's purpose and profits. We have to see purpose. By focusing on purpose, of course, we have to make money. But purpose is often misunderstood. Purpose works like ethics. It's in the details. It's not in the video. My friend Jen Griffith is saying, this is about what we do. Ethics about what we do, and she's absolutely right about that. Purpose is in the details, just like with ethics. It's in what you do not what you say. In a company, purpose is not some grand statement that's listed on a mouse pad or a pen or a plaque on the wall. Purpose lives in the systems and processes. It lives in how we treat each other every day. Purpose is important for inspiring people, but that's not all it is. And purpose has to come with the idea that we can push back, that there can be dissent. Great companies have to become, and purpose-driven companies have to become more democratic in the sense that, look, when we're not living our purpose, we need to know. If it's important to us, we should welcome the feedback that, hey, we're not living it here. This system doesn't treat people with respect, or this particular way of doing business doesn't treat our suppliers as partners. And we need to figure out how that dissent and pushback can be throughout the business. This was brought home to me by my son when he was about 10. He's older now. I'm at his house. I had to tell him when he was 10 that I couldn't take him to the father-son basketball camp because I had to be in Indonesia to teach. And he looked at me. Now remember, he's 10. So those of you who have had 10-year-olds know that they're great because you're still their hero. You know, the hormone poisoning hasn't hit yet, and you know, 10's a great age. And he looked at me and said, "Dad, what's more important, your family or your job?" And I said, "Well, you know, my family, of course." And he looked at me and said, "Well, you're not acting like it." And of course, he was right. I didn't realize how important going to this camp was to him, and I could have scheduled Indonesia whenever I wanted, but he's pushing back, right? He's given me some feedback, to which I thankfully said, "I think you're right. I have to go because, you know, I made a commitment, and we keep our commitments." That was something else we talked about a lot. You know, but next summer I won't travel at all. I'll coach your team, and I will hang out. And I did the next summer, and summer after that, and we created a lot of value. So much so that we're starting 2 businesses now. We would not have created that value if he didn't push back. And so we have to value dissent and pushback if purpose is important to us. And this is, I think, one of the biggest lessons that is about ethics. This is one of the biggest lessons I think we can learn from thinking about business in this new way. Purpose is important, but if it's important, dissent and pushback have to be center stage, it seems to me, and we have to learn how to deal with that. Another way to say it is to say, if we want purpose to matter, it's got to be a live conversation. It can't just be whatever we accept and say. It has to be a conversation that people can raise and be in. Well, second idea is the idea, no surprise, of stakeholders and shareholders. Any business creates or sometimes destroys value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and people with the money. I've always thought this was the simplest idea in the world. I've never understood why it was seen as radical. I've created, I think, enemies on the left and right of the political spectrum with this idea, because, you know, the people on the left think I've sold out the business, and the people on the right think I'm a socialist. And I've just tried to say, look, this is what businesses do. This is what they've always done. How could you do anything else? Leading and guiding a business, managing a business, means getting these interests going in the same direction. The real important idea in stakeholder theory is not that they're more than shareholders. That's an obvious thing. It's that the interests of customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money are joint. They're interdependent. How you create value for one, it depends in part on how you create value for the others. And so we have to see, the metaphor I like is to get these interests going in the same direction, keep them in harmony. Harmony, because in music, at least, when notes are in harmony, they're different notes, but they sound good together. And trying to figure out how to get these different interests. Customers and suppliers don't have always the same interests. There's a jointness, though, that they have to move together. And trying to get these interests working in harmony is what's there. Now, to do this, you have to think about how they go together, not think about trade-offs. It's way too easy to say, well, I'll just cut prices a little bit here, so I can, I'll cut prices with suppliers, so I can pay employees more or give more to shareholders. And that trade-off thinking is easy, but I think we have to come to see it as a failure. I've told this story a lot. I apologize if you've heard it before, but a long time ago, I was listening to the CEO of a big chemical company talk about becoming more environmentally friendly, and they put a stake in the ground. And he said, we're gonna work towards zero pollution. And he articulated a business-like approach where we're going to be here by a certain date, here by another certain date, et cetera. And it was going to take a generation, but we were going to reduce our environmental footprint. And this particular company, I'm happy to say, has done that. They're not at zero, but they have really done a lot. Now, after the CEO announces this, and by the way, I didn't have anything to do with him. I just heard him speak at a conference. He has to go and give it goes to all the facilities and gives the speech that they're going to do this. And at one facility, as he tells the story, the engineer said, well, sorry, sir, but we can't do it. The plant and equipment is too old, and the process is too dirty. We can't meet the first goal. Sorry, the first interim target. We can't meet it. And the CEO says, well, I guess we'll have to close the plant. Now the way I heard this was, you want me to make a trade-off? Community, environment on the one hand, employees on the other hand. Community wins, employees lose. Right? I'll make a trade-off. And the engineers go away and come back a few weeks later, and they say, actually, a miracle has occurred. We figured out how to do it. The CEO says, well, what's it going to cost? He's thinking $10, $20 million. It's a big facility. And the engineer said, well, we're actually embarrassed to say if we do it this new way, we're going to save money. Now, what's going on here? What's going on is when trade-offs become unacceptable, we kick into gear the only real resource we have. That's what's up here. We kick into gear our creative imagination, and we can figure out a way to save money and be greener. If we look for a trade-off, we're never going to find that. If you look for trade-offs, I'm pretty sure all you're going to find is trade-offs. if you look for ways to get both stakeholder interest, or really win, 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 get them all going in the same direction. Look, it's hard to do that. It's absolutely hard to do. That's easy to say, but it's hard to do. One of my friends who's a CEO who's particularly good at this says, well, the only good thing about it is if you do this again and again, if you look for win-win-wins all the time, you get better at finding them. I think, for instance, business schools, and I'm going to put mine here. Again, I don't know much about yours. I'm going to put mine here and say, we need to get better at teaching students how to use their creative imagination. We're not going to do that in the traditional business courses. What we have to do is turn to the other sources of knowledge, the humanities, and particularly the creative arts, to music, to art, to theater. That's where we really can see the creative imagination and flow. So thinking about stakeholders is thinking about getting the interests going in the same direction, thinking about how we use our creative imagination. It's also about thinking about relationships. Much of business is about transactions. I'm going to think about this transaction, this contract, and then I'll think about the next one when the time comes. Now, when you have a relationship with somebody, think about it personally for a minute. When you have a personal relationship with somebody, what does that mean? It means that relationship, there's a presumption that it's going to continue. If you're always thinking, am I going to say anything to this person next, or are we going to do anything together next, et cetera, you don't have a relationship, right? In relationships, there's a presumption that it will continue. The second thing that's there is you don't keep score all the time. My favorite example of this is, of course, during the pandemic, when we were at home alone, my wife and I we've been married for 44 years. We probably spent more time together in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 44, with both of us traveling for careers and stuff. And it was all good. I mean, sometimes you don't know how that's going to turn out, but it turned out great. I'm very happy to say. But if I had gone into her office and said, baby, I've been thinking about the last 44 years, and I think you're up 3. I think you owe me 3. I sort of told her what the score was. I'm pretty sure that would not have been a good outcome for me. Aside from the fact that she's a 2nd degree black belt in Taekwondo, I'm pretty sure that would not have been good. Why? You don't keep score. You figure out how to harmonize your interest, but you don't have to keep score all the time. And that's really important in thinking about stakeholders as relationships. One of my friends who's started an interesting company in the U.S. It's about $1 billion or so. It's called the Container Store. It says, his contracts with suppliers weren't contracts. They were hugging a handshake, and people built factories based on that. Why? Because they had a relationship. They trusted each other. They knew that relationship was going to continue over time. So, look, I often get accused of being anti-shareholder, but I'm not. It's stakeholders and shareholders. Shareholders are important. I think they're best seen as an outcome. How much money you create or how much value you create for shareholders is a function of how much value you create for customers, suppliers, employees, and communities. And so it's best to focus on customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and then the outcome of that is shareholder value. So it's stakeholders and shareholders. So purpose and profits, stakeholders and shareholders. Seeing seeing stakeholders and shareholders as important, it's important for business ethics. When I wrote my old stakeholder book, again, my PhD is in philosophy, not in business. I showed up at Wharton as a postdoc. And the only reason I did that was because my girlfriend, the same woman I've been married to for 44 years now, was at the same school. And there weren't many jobs in philosophy. So, I switched to thinking about business. But, I didn't know very much about it. And I didn't know that you're supposed to separate the business part from the ethics part. I just didn't know that, because those things seem to go together to me. So we have to see this idea. Look, to even say the word stakeholder is to do ethics. Why? Because it says these other groups have a stake. And that's to make not only a claim as to how the world works, but how it ought to work as well. We need to think about ethics as conversation. I'll say a little bit more about this later. And as I've said, we need to use our creative imagination. We need to be relationship leaders, not transactional leaders. And I think that's a lot harder than often we think through. The third idea is that we need to see business as a force in society as well as in markets. Part of stakeholder capitalism has been, some people have said, well, look, stakeholder capitalism is just virtue signaling. It's just trying to, sound as if as if it matters. But I think that may be true for some, or others have said, well, it's just CSR. Or others have said, well, this is about elites gathering together in, snow-covered mountains in Switzerland and thinking through what governments ought to do to make life better. All those things may have their use. My version of this is about the business model. It's about how you think about what your business is, what your business is, how it affects society, and how your business is going to take on at least some of the societal issues that we face. In other words, we need to see business as embedded in human society. And business has to be a part of the solution to issues like inequality, and especially opportunity inequality. It has to be part of the solution to gender discrimination, race and class discrimination. It has to be part of the solution, certainly, to global warming. We need thousands of experiments. We need thousands of entrepreneurs out trying stuff, inventing stuff to make business more sustainable, to make our lives more sustainable. We need businesses involved in building more democratic institutions. I think business schools can play a huge role here. And businesses have to have the courage to tackle tough issues like global warming and opportunity inequality and poverty. Look, every business can't, and no business can solve a problem like poverty, but a business can figure out how to make a dent. And with thousands of businesses making small dents, we might actually find some solutions that can be scaled, etc. So we need to see business as societal institutions. And of course, they're market forces. Of course, those are there too. Purpose and profit, stakeholders and shareholders, business as societal institutions as well as market institutions. Fourth idea I'll be quick about is that, honestly, we got to see human beings as complicated. Of course, we can maximize our own short-term economic self-interest. You know, people that only do that, we have a name for them. We call them sociopaths. And at least in some places around the world, we elect them to high office. That's pretty much a nonpartisan statement for me, so you don't get the wrong idea. But you know, that's more than I'll have to say today about our political systems, at least in the U.S., as being almost broken. But a human being is really different. A human being. Think about for a minute. This is an iPhone that I desperately need to upgrade. Think about how we got from our history, which evolutionary theory tells us, you know, we come down from the trees, we learn to live on the savannah, we live in groups, etc. Think about how we got from that to this iPhone. What did we do? Well, we invented language. And even within language, we were able to invent vocabularies to solve our problems. We had to invent the vocabulary for metal and glass. Those we didn't just find those. We had to literally invent the vocabulary. And when I say invent the vocabulary, that also means work with the material so that the vocabulary made sense. And then we had to figure out how to cooperate together to make those things real and in an efficient way. The beauty of Adam Smith's story of the pen factory is not that we can specialize our labor. Yes, that's important, but we can coordinate. We can figure out how to work together. What's a human being? Human being, somebody that can invent vocabularies to solve their problems and then cooperate together to make those solutions real. Of course, we can be one-dimensional maximizers. Human beings are able to do terrible things, as we know from our history. But I hope in the 21st century, we see the good part as well, that we're able to cooperate together to solve our problems. Yes, incentives are important, as businesses say, but so are other values. And it's seeing how we can at once be self-regarding and other-regarding. That's important. Purpose and profit, stakeholders and shareholders, societal and markets, people as complicated as well as self-interested. And finally, the fifth idea is the one you probably wished I'd talked about at the beginning, putting together business and ethics. This idea that business people are greedy little bastards out trying to do each other in and compete is an idea that's honestly completely disrespectful to us as human beings. Business people are capable and do create so much more of value than that. Of course, we can be greedy and self-interested, and we all know people who are like that. But for the most part, people tell the truth. Language doesn't work, by the way, if for the most part we don't tell the truth and say what we believe. And people can act responsibly most of the time. We need to expect that behavior from each other and from our businesses. This means we have to think about ethics in a slightly different way. We think about ethics oftentimes as right, wrong, good, bad. We make judgments about whether something's correct or not correct. And that's an important part of ethics. But there's more to ethics. Thinking about how we frame a particular problem. I'll give you a good example. If we frame business problems as all about how we make money for shareholders, that's very different than framing the problem as how do we create value for all our stakeholders. The language we use, the vocabulary we use, the the very words that we use to conceptualize what we do matters a great deal. If we always only see business in terms of the money, and we see business theory as, let's say, the physics of money, we're not going to get very far here. Yes, money's important. Profits are important. It's one vocabulary, but it's not the only one. Competition is one vocabulary to think about business, but it's not the only one. And I'd argue, really, these aren't the most important ones. As a CEO friend of mine says, the only assets I manage go up and down the elevators every day. You know, business is about how we human beings cooperate together to create value for each other. And capitalism is the greatest system of social cooperation we've ever invented. It's about how we cooperate together to create something that no one of us can do alone. And given the technologies that are in front of us for the 21st century, it's truly amazing, I think, what we're able to do when we unleash our creative imagination. What stakeholder capitalism tries to do is say, let's forget about, you know, is business ethics a contradiction? We need a view of business that sees human beings as at our best, at what we're able to figure out how to do. And yes, there have been lots of excesses of capitalism in the past, but let's think about how we unleash our creative imagination, start businesses, and invent vocabularies that solve our problems, and experiment in a way that builds our institutions in a more democratic way. And where that works, let's scale it. And where it doesn't work, oh, let's try something else. That seems to me to be the best of business. If you don't like capitalism, it's a word that's got too much baggage. It must have had too much baggage for Adam Smith. He never used it. We get capitalism from Marx, which, you know, is sort of like letting the enemy determine kind of what you wear every day. That's probably not such a good idea. So it has sort of a bad rap, but I hope that calling out stakeholder capitalism, what that means is that, look, this is not something that you got to add ethics to, or you got to add corporate responsibility to. Stakeholder capitalism is about how we want our businesses to be responsible. Ethics on this view becomes a conversation and a commitment to listening. And we have to listen not just for right, wrong, good, bad, for judgment, but we have to listen for what something makes possible. Listening to people for what their ideas make possible is very different than listening to say right, wrong, or good, bad. And listening for what people are not saying, listening for the silence, is equally important. One way to put this is to see our values, our purpose, our ethics as conversation starters, not conversation stoppers. And it's so frustrating to me, at least, to look at the political realm and to see people saying, well, I believe this, and that ends the conversation. What we need to do is, so, you know, I believe this, what do you believe? How can we figure out how we both can flourish? We can certainly have those conversations. If we can't have them in the political realm, we can certainly have them in our organization. The results of these 5 principles, I think, are a different and more responsible view of business becomes a real possibility. Many people, I'll just finish up with this, many people want to know, well, Ed, that sounds great, but, you know, can I make money at this? Now, they often mean by that, if I manage my business this way, which we know in our hearts is the right thing to do. If I manage my business this way, will I be financially successful? Now, if what you want is a guarantee that you're going to be financially successful, my advice has always been buy a refrigerator. They come with guarantees. Management ideas generally don't. Are you going to be financially successful if you manage your business only for shareholders? I think the global financial crisis should have resoundingly given the answer to that. No, there are no guarantees here. If you manage your business this way, is it possible to be financially successful? That's the right question. Is the proof of possibility, not the proof of necessity. And the proof of possibility is in. Of course it is. There have been studies from people like Raj Sisodia and his colleagues that show that people that manage their companies along the lines we've been talking about are radically more successful than others, or can be radically more successful than others in just pure financial terms, in addition to other terms, in terms of the value that's created for stakeholders. So the proof of possibility is in. We know the answer to that. But there's another criteria here. It's a criteria I've always tried to apply to what I do, and I have called it the Ben, Emma, and Molly rule. And that's because those are the names of my three kids, Ben, Emma, and Molly. If I can go home at the end of the day and say to Ben, Emma, and Molly, let me tell you what I did today. Let me tell you what I'm proud of that I want you to learn from. Because if we're not trying to make our organizations places for our children to live in, if we're not trying to make our churches and mosques and synagogues and schools, and of course our political organizations and our businesses places for our children to live in, we've got the bar too low. What stakeholder capitalism tries to do is put ethics in the center and say, we have to make our organizations better. We have to be the generations, and there are many of them, several generations here today. We have to be the generations that make business better. We have to be the generations that make business more fit for our children, more fit for human flourishing all over the world. Once again, it's been a real honor to deliver this talk today, and I would be happy to answer any questions or have any dialogue that you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. So now we'll be taking the questions through the chat box. So I'll request all the participants to put in the questions there in the chat box.
While we're waiting for that, I'll just say, if you want to know more about this stakeholder idea, you can go to the Stakeholder Podcast, which is on many podcast places, where there are interviews with everyone from CEOs to students about what stakeholder capitalism is. So I'll do that small nonprofit ad there.
Doctor, I have a question in the chat box, which is by Rangoli. Do you want me to read out the question for you?
Well, hang on a minute. Let me just, let's see. Stakeholder theory is nearly 40 years old. While it's become a popular talking point in practice, we've witnessed corporate boards increasingly focused on financial indicators. That's resulted in greater frequency of restructuring, downsizing, outsizing utilization of temporary workers. Why do you think we're not witnessing greater usage of stakeholder theory in practice? Well, I would disagree with the premise here. We are witnessing greater use of stakeholder theory in practice. We have a tendency in business to engage in what I would call saints and sinners thinking. For the most part, because we see business as morally questionable. Hence the laughter when we say business ethics. We see businesses primarily as places where people are just worrying about the money and only focused on financial indicators. But once somebody declares that they're going to focus on some good stuff, I'll just use as an example, and there are hundreds of these examples. We talk about a lot of them in The Power of And. Medtronic is a company that invented the pacemaker for heart surgery. They also did. They have a product that's a ventilator. When COVID hit, they made all their designs of ventilators public so that anybody could make them. And they even had engineers that would help other companies to make ventilators. And so when the CEO was asked about profits about this, he just said, look, this is not a time to think about that. This is a time to think about how we help people. In my experience, boards, every board I know about is trying to figure out ESG and what they do about that. So yes, there have been scandals. Yes, there have been restructuring, downsizing, especially in the 90s and after that. But the last post global financial crisis has seen, in my view, a radical change towards this. Look, you still got to make money. There's no question about that. So I would just disagree that that's what it is. But oftentimes what happens is when a company says, now when Medtronic does something that focuses on the money, people are going to say, see, they didn't mean that other stuff. They're really only interested in the money. But it turns out it's both of those things. I think we also have somebody with a raised hand, or we did have.
Yes, sir. So there's one
Okay.
question, which is from Professor Sumit Sarkar, and he has asked that what if there is a conflict of interest between the stakeholders in the community, and also if there are conflicts of interest between different stakeholders, how do we resolve them?
Again, I think what happens is, yes, stakeholder interests can conflict. And so what we have to do is, again, use our creative imagination to try and find a way of dissolving the conflict, trying to figure out the win-win-win. And look, that's hard to do. It's especially hard to do if you're a student and you've had no training in how to find win-win-wins. There are oftentimes many currencies at issue in the world. And so we have to figure out how to deal in these multiple currencies at the same time, and that's hard to do. And I think as business tools, we've got to do a better job at that as well. I see a question about, do I see a need for a legal framework that allows representation of stakeholders on boards, like works councils in Germany, to allow for better execution of stakeholder theory? Well, I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, trying to decide, wrote some papers about it. And I'm pretty uncertain about that now. There were a lot of legislation in the US in the 80s and 90s at the state level. That's where businesses are chartered here, about, can I take can I take stakeholder interest into account, or do I have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder power? And it turns out the answer to that in a little book called Myth of the Shareholder by Professor Lynn Stout is, shareholders don't own companies in the US. They don't own companies in the US, even in Delaware, which is the state most big companies are chartered in. Directors have an obligation to manage the affairs of the corporation. They have a duty of care to the corporation, and not only to shareholders. And in most cases, of course, directors can take stakeholder interests into account because they're critical for the future of the corporation, to the affairs of the corporation. That's the way the courts have gone. So there's this myth that shareholders own the company. And you can't ignore them, of course, but think about that for a minute. Can you ignore your customers? Well, that would be a dumb thing to do, or your suppliers, or what many companies actually do ignore is their employees. No, you can't. A successful company takes those into account, as well as communities. So I'm not sure a legal framework is needed. Now, the other side to that is sometimes we have frameworks for capital markets so that a raider can come in, buy a company or put a company in play and essentially ruin it. So I'm not in favor of that. I don't know what the right legislation is here. People have said, well, maybe you shouldn't get voting rights with a stock until you've held it for a couple of years. I'm not opposed to that. I just don't know what the effects of that might be. And it's different for different countries, I know. You have a framework in India that says you've got to give a certain amount, I thought it was 2%, but I could be wrong, to corporate social responsibility. I don't know how that's working. Probably in some cases it's working well. In other cases, it's probably, not working very well. The problem with legislation is it's one size for everybody. That's the way it has to be in a democracy like India or the US. But businesses are very different. And what works for one may not work for another. And so that's why, again, I'm of two minds about this legal framework issue. I don't know the one and only one legal framework that would work for all businesses all the time, all around the world, or even just in a particular country, because the businesses are so different. And the technologies that we have today are so different than any that we've thought about. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of ethics work to be done just thinking about what these new technologies can do. If I think about AI and those kinds of things, or even things like autonomous vehicles. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work that we need to do here. I see another question that says, unacceptable trade-offs ignites creative imagination, right? How do we as future leaders cultivate creative imagination without having to wait for an unacceptable trade-off? Like all of these, that's a great question. And the answer I'm going to give you is pretty unconventional for a business school professor. My answer is very straightforward. Look, I'm a amateur musician. My son and I, who's a professional musician here in Nashville, my son and I have a small record company. We write songs and record and play music. And doing music changes your brain. It exercises the creative imagination. It's not just music. I taught a course called Leadership, Ethics, and Theater So I took MBA students, turned them into a theater troupe, and we wrote, complete works of art and performed them for people. And it's not just music and theater; it's thinking about fiction and writing fiction and art. These are the things that build creative imagination. And in my experience, if you take on those things, first of all, it's a hell of a lot of fun. And second of all, you generally do it, you can do it with somebody. And that's the biggest parallel to business, is when you engage in these creative activities like music or art with somebody. So you're not just doing it alone. But even if you do it alone, it'll change your brain, and we not know that. So I would encourage all of you to, if you ever did music in your life, go back and do it again. It doesn't take but 10, 15 minutes a day. There are enormous resources on the to do that. And if you have at all any ideas that you want to be a rock star, go to truefire.com. It's 40,000 guitar lessons. But there are lots of ways to do it. It doesn't matter what kind of music it is. And I'm sure there are other ways to do it as well. Those are just using the creative arts are the way I've tried to do that.
So there's one more question which is regarding corporate social responsibility. So it has been asked by Professor Kalyan Bhaskar, and he has asked, do you see the regulatory approach to CSR? So the way India has done by mandating companies fulfilling certain criteria to spend 2% of profits on CSR, gaining any traction in near future? And is it the right way to go about it?
Again, I can't comment on whether it's the right way to go about it for in India. It would not be the right way to go about it in the US, for sure. The problem with CSR is that it somehow assumes that business is bad, and I need to sprinkle in a little CSR to legitimize it. And that's not what we need. What we need is a wholesale, different view, a completely different view of what business is. We don't need CSR bolted on at the end. We need a business model that pays attention to customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money. We need that at the business model level. It's too easy to say, well, I'll be a bad guy over here and pollute, but I'll give 2% to CSR, and that'll make up for it. So I think CSR, the idea, I get kind of credit for, being somebody who's been very pro CSR, and many of my friends are, and their hearts are in the right place. It's not that what's wrong with it is it reinforces the old model. It reinforces, look, there's the business part, and then there's the CSR and the ethics part. And I want to break that idea. I want us to not be able to tell what part's the business part and what part's the ethics part. Those things have to go together. And that's why I think CSR hopefully will gradually sort of wither away here, if you like. Now, again, it might be doing some great things here, so I don't want to comment on that. In the U.S., people would figure out how to game it, and I think they would quickly, people would write checks or. Except for the companies, this would punish them, who are already integrating the societal issues with the business issues. That's what we need, not separating out however big a percentage it is for that. So I generally, I haven't been very much in favor of CSR, because I think if you pay attention to doing the right thing for your stakeholders, you know, you don't need it. So I've never understood, by the way, somebody who said, look, customers want to buy your products because they're great, and your products make their lives better. Suppliers want to work with you because working with you makes them better. There's a long line of people who want to sign up to be employees here. And by the way, communities want you because you're a community builder, and you're making money so that shareholders want your stock. What I want to know is, are you socially responsible? Okay, I just don't know what that means. If you're creating value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with money, I don't know what it means to be asked to be more socially responsible. So, you know, I've always thought, if you have something like stakeholder capitalism, you may not need something like corporate social responsibility as a concept, even though, again, look, people who do CSR, their hearts are absolutely in the right place.
Thank you, sir. So probably we'll take the last question for the day, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So Professor Devrati Basu has asked that business leaders seem to be under pressure to not just act on ESG dimensions like climate risk, but also take a more political and policy stance on aspects like voting rights. So we are seeing businesses messaging in practice actually, but not in action yet. Do you see this as a viable extension to stakeholder theory?
Yes, I do. But again, I'm going to slightly disagree. We have seen some action. If you go to the website of Just Capital, Just Capital is a NGO that partners with Goldman Sachs and others, and they collect data and rate every public business in the US now. They rate every public business based on how they're doing with respect to ethics and justice. And one of the things they've done is collect data on what companies are doing with respect to the pandemic, or what they're doing with respect to racial discrimination. Companies, after the George Floyd killing here in the US, pledged something like $50 billion to fight racial discrimination. Well, Just Capital is collecting data on what they've done and therefore what they've not done. And so I've looked at the pandemic data, and a lot of companies have really done a lot for their employees, et cetera. Some have not. Just Capital sees themselves as getting this data on that's been traditionally seen as non-market data, but that has tremendous impact on the risk reward of a company, as getting that data to decision making. If you just go to the Just Capital website, you'll find a tremendous source of what companies are doing, and I very much applaud Just Capital. And what I think they're ultimately doing is holding companies' feet to the fire. I would say, wait a minute, you said you were going to do that. You said you stood for this, or you're going to do this, but you haven't done anything. And I think that's a brilliant business model, and something that we really need. Now, look, there'll be lots of different ways to measure things, and we need lots of good thinking about that, and lots more organizations that might measure things differently. But the idea is, I think, very sound, that companies are going to have their feet held to the fire about this, and so they better be serious when they say things. And I think for the most part, they are serious about this. Because look, there's nowhere to hide today. There's nowhere that you won't get called out if you say something and you don't mean it. This is probably part of why the political world is in such a turmoil. Again, I don't know about India, but certainly in the US, the turmoil with people being held to, well, wait a minute, you said this last year. What changed so that you're saying it differently now? We need ways, what that leads to in the US is people just not telling the truth. And we'll find ways to call them on that, as Just Capital is doing with companies. So I'm very much in favor of things like that, with businesses getting their feet held to the fire. It's no different than my son saying to me, "What's more important, Dad, your family or your job?" He's holding my feet to the fire about what my values are. And ethics doesn't matter at all if you're not willing to have your feet held to the fire. And that may not be a great metaphor for you. It is for us. And if you're not willing to have people call you when you're not living your values, and call you on that, and that's, we need more of that, not less.
Thank you so much, sir. So one of the professors have requested to accommodate one more question, if
Sure.
we can do. So I'll read out the question. So Professor K.R. Shamsundar has asked that how wide and deep the impact of stakeholder capitalism to address, even cure, the structural inequalities ingrained in capitalism, like power and wealth distribution. Lest this is reinventing capitalism, and this model demonstrates the depth and extent of flexibility which sustains capitalism, unlike communism.
Well, again, capitalism and communism are concepts that have a lot of baggage. Ultimately, I'm interested in business, and understanding the power of businesses is, of course, important. It's especially important in a system where there's what I would call, but what people call crony capitalism, where businesses have hold of the power of government to exclude others, and make special favors for themselves. The thing I love about business is, for the most part, in a free society, we can start companies and grow them. I think it's ironic that some of the companies now that, at least in the US, people are talking about regulating and having too much power, didn't exist 15 years ago. Or if they did exist, which Apple did, but it wasn't very powerful at all. Google probably didn't exist, maybe 20 years ago. And Facebook certainly didn't exist. Entrepreneurs grew those companies, and people have started, people who didn't like what they've done have started companies that will ultimately replace them. So that part of business, I really like. I think because we've had a story of business that puts business against ethics, we've often seen business people think that somehow they have an exception to ethics. And that's a part of the old story that we need to get rid of. About how to do the broad societal capitalism, socialism, communism kinds of ideas. Again, I think we get a lot of that analysis not by looking at what the business models are and how they actually work, but by looking at kind of this ideal of how, you know, it's supposed to work for every business in every situation. And I don't think there is a viable model for that. And I think we paid too much attention to the disciplines in business, like many parts of economics, not all parts, but many parts of economics that have ways of thinking about business that, you know, are not very useful to people in business. I'm not saying economics isn't useful. I'm saying sometimes the ways we think about it aren't useful to people in business. And ultimately in business schools, it seems to me, you know, one of our stakeholders has to be, how can we make business better? Better in the sense of, yes, of course, more profitable, but better in the sense of more ethical as well. If we're not trying to do that as business students, and that's what I am, I'm just a student of business. If we're not trying to do that as business students, I don't know who will. And so I see that as a moral imperative, for us.
Thank you so much, sir. So I would like to request Professor A.K. Pani to express his gratitude. Thank you so much.
Honorable Speaker, Dr. Edward Freeman, Father Paul, the Director, Father Donald, Dean Administrations, faculty colleagues, alumni, member of the press, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. As the art system threshold are being tested by human activities, the business world is searching for alternatives for revisioning its existence. Present and future business leaders will be challenged to create sustainable value for internal and external stakeholders alike. While sustainable development provides a macroeconomic perspective, we need implementable models that create tangible outcomes for all the stakeholders. I'm happy to share that XLRI has been the pioneer institute in offering a core course on managerial ethics for the last 50 years and has introduced a core course on corporate sustainability since 2007. XLRI is also the first management institute in the country, India, to endorse the UN Responsible Management Educations from 2007. In this context, I'm sure that the oration of today by Dr. Edward Freeman provides a roadmap for present and the future business leaders to recast and revise their business strategies. I'm sure the students will imbibe the ideas and follow them when they enter the corporate world. I thank Dr. Freeman for finding time, such early morning hour, and deliver the lecture. I thank Director, Dean, faculty, and the students. Without their cooperation in making this event will be difficult. Though COVID has not gone drastically reduced in this part of the country, I end with requesting all my student friends to maintain the social distance and be safe. Thank you and a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Freeman. It's wonderful listening to you and a great oration.
Dr. Freeman, thank you. Lovely to hear you, and Thank you. There were about 800 people, so a lot of people attended. A lot of people were enlightened. Really grateful to you. Thank you.